Welcome to Reframe. This is something I advise you to do anytime you wish, especially before any of the modules you undertake or any of the units that you are experimenting with and exploring with us. Okay. Now this one is also about, in some level, waking up the body, waking up its surfaces, its membranes, being aware of the space outside of the body, being aware of the space inside the body, being aware of the reach and the extent to which we are sensing beings in the world. And it'll be very beneficial for you to do this as often as you like, every day if you wish. And very nice to do before we do any of the art and the engagement modules that are to come. Okay? So, to start with, just sense yourself in the chair and just give yourself a bit of a wriggle so you can feel where your sit bones are. At the base of the pelvis, these two sit bones finding their place, finding their resting point in the chair beneath you. And then identify the coccyx behind and let yourself rest in this triangle. I'm doing it the other way, but I can't put my hand that way, so just imagine that's your coccyx, these are your sit bones here. And feel the support of the chair, feel the support of the triangular base. And breathe. Sometimes I think this looks a bit like the basketball hoops that you see in the cul-de-sacs around us. So you have a triangular base, you have a central column rising up out of the base, and then at the top you've got the basketball hoop. So if that works for you, use your imagination to help with that. But from out of the triangular base, you've got the central axis, the beautiful spinal column. And as you breathe, there's this lovely feeling of rising as well as falling. It happens miraculously both ways. Keep your neck soft, keep your eyes soft, your ears soft. And just imagine your head rolling a little on top, almost like a golf ball on a tee. Just feeling it nice and supported by the spine, but also loose and free. And imagine the dome of the cranium, full of space. We've got a brain in there somewhere, but just imagine the space between the brain and the cranial dome. And see if you can refer that cranial dome as a structure in relationship to the central axis and then your tail. So I want you to become really aware of your tail. I'll explain why we're doing this in a moment, but for the moment, just let yourself travel, let yourself experience your body as it is. And then let your tail grow longer. We actually have the memory of having had tails. This is part of our ancestral memory. It's our ancestral architecture. See if you can feel that breathing through your tail. And for some of you, you might actually feel as if your tail wants to reach to the ground behind you. Sit deep in that tail. See what happens. For you, it might be a kangaroo tail, or it might be something like a cockatoo tail. Let your imagination be soft with it. And letting the tail experience the ground behind you, or the air behind you. Feel the wind rustling the feathers, or tickling the skin and the fur of that tail. And let your eyes go really soft now, really think back into that tail and let your tail understand the landscape behind you. Let it reach into the ground and into the horizon. Animals are very good at knowing what's happening behind them, even if it's miles away. They pick up the vibration, the presence of things in the landscape. They know the movement in the soil, they know the movement in the air, whether it's a predator or a friend. Just let yourself feel that support and the length of your tail. Great, and when you really, really feel that tail there, breathe into the upper body. Just breathe and feel the difference it makes to have that support. And one of the things that happens under duress, and perhaps the circumstances we've been in the past 2 years, is that we feel very isolated. The body starts to feel like it's alone. It's holding itself up. But we have an opportunity here to really feel what it is to be held. As we develop the modules of restoring and you work through the modules as you wish, we'll be adding to this sense with many other exercises, but this is a very core practice. Sit in your tail, remember your ancient anatomy, and then feel different in your body. We're accompanied by this in our DNA and our history, and we're also accompanied by breath and all the space that the breath massages. So breathing in and breathing out. And see if you can observe the way that the breath moves all the bones. There's this wonderful sense of expansion as you breathe in. And then there's a release when you breathe out. And particularly in this rib area, when you breathe in, the ribs expand and they move into the space beside you. And when you breathe out, the space beside you gets a little bit of its own inch back, its inches back. So there's a massage, there's an exchange, a reciprocation. Both of what's inside you being shared outwardly and what's the outside world being shared inwardly. And all the time, our structure and our membranes are being moved and massaged. Let yourself enjoy this space. Okay. Just gently take one hand and slide it across, and then the other, and slide it down your arm. Slide it across the front. Slide it across your forehead. So you're aware of your body as a surface, but the breath itself is filling the whole of the interior within. This is continuous. As long as we're alive, we're breathing. There are some ancient shamanic traditions around the world where there's a belief that everything is standing up alive. Everything has breath, has language, has intention, if you like, and is in a process of reciprocation and exchange. What does that feel like to experience this? What does it feel like to experience the back of your body breathing and massaging the air behind you, being in reciprocal dialogue? What does it feel to have that tail listening and hearing and also receiving nourishment from way back behind you? Everything standing up alive. That's a phrase from River Junction Curlew, a North American Indigenous elder. Just sitting in that exchange. We are equal to it. We have our place in the world. And rest. I'd like to take just a moment now to explain one of the key principles which has helped me devise the work. Astrophysicists conjecture, is probably the best word for it, that 80% of the universe is actually dark matter and only 20% is the material world that we can receive through our senses or even through their equipment, such as it is at the moment. It could even be as high as 90% to 10%. But there's something quite phenomenal and staggering to think about, that there's 80% of the universe is something we can't perceive. And yet the conjecture is also, and the presumption is also, that the 20% that is accessible to our senses actually relies on the 80% to come into form. So this means that most of what coexists with us all the time, every second, is actually invisible to us, but coexistent. And when we have in our culture and our practices so much emphasis on outcomes, on achievement, on linear time and endpoints, that belongs to the 20%. So how do we nurture the 80%? This is one of the driving intentions that has brought me to create this work. How do we pay respect to the 80% that belongs to the invisible, the as yet unformed, the latent? We need to make space for this in our practices, or it's beneficial to. If we just think about it mathematically, if all we're nourishing is that 20% or all we're driven by is that 20%, well, there's an awful lot of the pre-existence of what comes into being that maybe it's just a good idea to give it some time and space, some massaging, some contemplation, some awareness brought to it. Now, one of the ways we can imagine that in a really concrete way is to think through the idea of, well, what is the body? The body is our presence here, and it is our muscle, blood and bone. But it is also our breath. It's also the space inside the body. And it is the organs that are held by space, and then there is the energetic fields, there are electromagnetic fields that comprise the body, and then there's also all of the relationships that we have from one to another, from ourselves to our environment, from ourselves to other people, from ourselves to everything that coexists with us, flora, fauna, energetic fields, whatever we like to identify. So that aspect of relationality is a critical factor of being human. It's a critical factor of being alive. And it's helpful to tease through and look at some other cultural practices to understand, like for example, in the Japanese culture, there is a word called ma. And ma refers to space between. And it is understood within traditional Japanese culture as something that is concrete. And it is given reverence to, for example, in rock gardens. So in Japanese temples where there's a courtyard that is filled with stones, and then there's very large stones that are placed in very refined sense of proportional relationship to each other. The stones are only a part of the garden. A significant part of the experience of being in that place is the space between, and there is an art form devoted to that. So one of the aspects here we're going to be engaging with as we continually work through our exercises is, how do we attend to the 80%? And we have a few tricks up our sleeve. Some of them will be to deliberately swap hands. We might be using a paintbrush, but we'll swap it over to the non-dominant hand, whichever one it is for you. It's a bit like the equivalent of what we did in one of the warm-ups, which is playing a few tricks on our bodies to reorient, reorganise the way that we compose ourselves and conduct ourselves. We all have habits and disciplines we work to, and then we are also so much more. So one of the key phrases I like to use is, what else is there? So we're going to leave this little unit here with that phrase, what more is there? What else is there? And let's continue the journey. We're going to engage in a sensory exercise now, which you can do in whatever circumstance you find yourself in. You can use whatever objects are around you in the room, or you can engage in a little special exercise or get a friend or a partner or one of your children to grab a paper bag and fill it for you with all sorts of objects that you don't know what's in it. It's really fun doing that. I have one here that I prepared before. But if you cannot do that, or you're on your own, it's equally effective to simply close your eyes and reach forward to whatever is there on your bookshelf, on your desk, in a drawer. I'll explain the exercise more fully in the moment, but just wherever you are, as you are. And we're going to engage in, it's a blindfold exercise essentially, and have ready your piece of paper to take notes when we've gone through the exercise itself. Okay, so I have here a sample of things from which you can take inspiration. Just use whatever's to hand if you don't have any of these kind of things there. Now, I actually am going to take my paper bag, which I have forgotten what's in it, which is good. And closing my eyes, I'm just going to reach in and feel around with what the objects are. And I'm actually going to try not to identify what any of the objects are. I'm going to try and let my fingertips do the sensing and the understanding. Now, if you rub your own fingertips like so, and then you just place them on your skin, just see what that feels like. Like, let the intelligence of the skin itself start to do the conversation. Feel what that is like. And remember to breathe. Sit in your tail if it helps to give you a sense of balance and presence. Notice qualities like hard or soft, but also even more subtle than that, heat or cool, and then the grain, the texture that is right there under your fingertips. Okay. And once more, you can go into your little surprise bag, your little goodie bag from the Easter show, and just see what you're drawn to. Keep breathing, soften your eyes, soften your mind, and just see which object you are drawn to. And keeping your eyes closed, let your hands explore. Move with it. Breathe. See how awake your fingers can be. My thumbs feel unusually awake today. I usually struggle with some RSI, but that's just out of the picture at the moment. All I can feel is this extraordinary sense of hollows, almost teeth-like. So a part of me can associate, and I can think of teeth, and I can think of hollows, I can think of shapes. I might press it against my skin in different places, and in fact go as slow as you like. Remember, you can stop and start your video and take as long as you like with this exercise. And in fact, that's what we might do, is we might invite you to pause your own video now. Just take as long as you need to absorb whatever it is that this is communicating to you. In the end, it might be something about its dimensions. How does it move through space? What is its own trajectory? If it were an animal and had its own volition, what would it want to do? See if you can taste it, translating it into the other senses, and hear it. And when you're ready, you might in your little notebook just jot down a few words or a few ideas. And just one more thing I'll demonstrate before we pause, is you might like to get your drawing pad, and there might be some things you want to sketch, simply to do with what that object communicates to you. And breathe, remember to breathe. So you can draw with your eyes open, that's fine. I'm doing it with my eyes closed just to try and remember the sensory input from it. And I'm also, in the little pause that we're going to have now, I'm going to write down a few words that came to me as well. So we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. Now, if you have exhausted the possibilities, the sensory information from your first object, see if you can do another deep dive into your bag or into your drawers and find the next thing that's calling to you. Remembering, if we are entertaining the idea that everything is standing up alive, it's really kind of singing out to you, so it might be that there's something that it wants to say. So we're listening. Okay, and now I've got my second object, playing with it. Just go as slow as you like. There's no program to this at all. It might be that you lie down and you leave it resting on your forehead, or whatever comes to you to do with it. Maybe it's edible. Let yourself eat it. Okay. So again, the process will be that you might want to, once you've allowed it to speak to you, to make notes, write them down in a column, and do some drawing. And let's see what we get to. Okay, over to you. I invite you to do this with as many objects as you feel are calling to you from this paper bag or in your shelves or around you, and until you feel like you've been given the exercise that you need and they've been given the exercise you need. Now, what I'm going to do is just play a little bit more with these, and I'll show you my two objects. This was number 1, this was number 2. And then I'm going to show you what the drawings were for me. This was number 1, and this was number 2. And you can see that they're not literal at all. This is not the representation of the shape of the egg, but it's got more to do with the sound that it made. And it's a bit of a surprise that was these wave-like motions that seemed to go on to infinity, and I was being communicated in that level. And the words were quite intriguing. You will have your own, but what I'm inviting you to do is to work with these objects and let them make a sentence. You might now have 3 or 4 drawings there, and you might be able to take some of the key words that you've worked with. Mine were teeth and thumbs and odalisque, and then with the egg it was rolling, moving forward and travelling. And maybe it's, if I try and make a sentence with that, it might be my thumb travelled through the universe towards the odalisque. I'm in an imaginary world, but I'm just letting things piece together because they've all coexisted with me. This paper bag preceded my attention to it, the objects preceded my attention. We're just letting things recombine and work really softly. So with that principle that everything is standing up alive and actually wanting to talk to us, maybe just to finish off this unit, we can just take a couple of your objects that you were working with and just see in as direct a way as possible, like where was it actually talking to you? Where was it trying to seek to talk to you? So in many shamanic traditions, the world itself is medicine, and we are beings who yearn for communication and contact, and maybe the objects themselves have been talking to a particular part of you. Okay. Enjoy, and then see where you go with this. Thank you for joining us for this unit, and we'll be moving forward on to another unit following. This exercise is something which I think you'll be able to work with today and then keep coming back to and keep being enriched in the process. Now, the idea behind a medicine wheel in most traditional cultures is that the medicine wheel is a guide. It is the world talking to us through a map of attributes, of communications. You've already drawn your template circle. You've already drawn your 4 directions, and maybe the directions in between. And most traditional cultures have medicine wheels of some sort as wayfinders, and we are going to be creating our own wayfinders through our own lives and through our own senses, and using this as a map of where we're at now and where we might be going, of strengths and weaknesses in our dynamic relationship to the world. Okay, so this is building on that idea of the world as medicine, the world talking in exchange with us. Now, it may be that for you, and we're just going to ask you again to sit in your tail, make sure that you're feeling like you're here, present in the body, present in your room, and breathe. And then you can work really intuitively. It might be for you that the north feels like a spiral, and it feels like wind. And maybe another direction is a triangle, and it feels like water. So use words or use drawings, whatever comes to you. There might be a sensation of heaviness in the south. Let yourself use that expressive gesture so that you're just mapping out your presence in this moment. This map might be true for you now, it might be true for you in a week's time, it might change completely. Just work with your intuition. Okay. Now, we're also going to put other attributes such as flora or fauna. One of the principles of working with or understanding totems and sacred animals in many cultures is that the animal arrives in order to communicate with you or to communicate with the community, saying, have you remembered this aspect of your life? Have you remembered this kind of movement through the world? Have you remembered water? We thirst for water, but we can forget about it too. And the aspect of remembering what is around us, what is in communication with us. It's one of the key aspects of ritual, of why ritual exists, in order to dance something from the world, make it welcome, allow its presence to teach us something about it. So, let yourself drawing a map in each of the directions, and maybe even in the centre. Mapping attributes and working through the senses, working through sight, taste, touch, hearing, smell. Remembering elements such as wind, water, air. Perhaps locations, mountains, seas, rivers, forests, animals, flowers, memories. At any time you can just pause your video, over to you. Take as long as you like, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. How did you go? One of the experiences we had when we were working in the space together and making these personal medicine compasses was some people found it really hard to fill in all of the spaces, and that in itself is a really significant part of this mapping process. You know, we tend to forget certain things habitually and we remember other things habitually, or some people didn't even know what to put in the north. So that in itself is a key realisation. What is the north? What is invisible to us at the moment or not so active? And these medicine wheels and medicine compasses have traditionally been used as mnemonics. So we'll put that word up here on the screen beside. It's a memory tool. Oh, I've forgotten about the north. Our whole community has forgotten about the north. Maybe we need to give exercise to the north. Remember water. Remember the animal who's been desperately trying to talk to us, has been appearing but not understood. Okay, so that's partly what the use is of the personal medicine compass. You can see here that someone's been very active, but I think it actually took this person a little bit of time to fill it in. And as you work through the modules, if you choose to keep going with restoring, you can keep adding to it. You can see what's changing. You can see, well, how is koala communicating with me? I didn't understand it at first. And we are deliberately setting up a space for mystery, for the unknowable, or the invisible, or something that we don't know yet to come in. Before we finish this exercise, I'm going to ask you to go back to one of the sensory objects that you were nourished by, that came out of your paper bag or your shelf or your drawer, and then, if you haven't done it already, See where it might sit, or a quality of it might sit on your medicine compass, and allow that self to be documented. Partly what we're doing in these restoring modules is a documenting process. It's actually allowing ourselves to recognise something, encapsulate it, symbolise it, draw it in. And in the end, you'll find as we proceed through the modules that I'm going to ask you to commit to an act of memory, draw it in to its most minuscule form, and then pop it into a walnut shell and put it in a storehouse for safekeeping that you can call on any time at all. So this will be like your little treasure trove. Okay, enjoy finishing your medicine compass for today, remembering that you can come back to it any time. It's an active mnemonic tool that you can keep working with for many, many weeks and days ahead. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for Reframe. Very much look forward to seeing you for other modules. Take care and see you next time.